Greetings, Inland Empire, and welcome to the latest edition of Political Empire. I'm your host, Kim Pierceall with the Press Enterprise and PE.com, and with the election fast approaching, we have a jam-packed show for you today with lots of political news. First, the headlines. We're going to talk about endorsements. Not all are created equal. Also, we're going to talk about super PACs and one individual who's been getting quite a bit of super PAC funding. Also, Insider Edition. Is it good to be a Washington insider or not? And also Gigi, who was running for the city clerk's office in San Bernardino. We're going to talk about that race because it was a very tight race. Also, in more detail, we're going to go into the California budget because that has been in the news quite a bit. There are more cuts pending. Also, the 35th race with Joe Baca, and a few challengers, all Democrats. We're going to talk to our Washington correspondent about those. The Riverside County Supervisor races. There are two districts that are vying for a seat right now, and so we're going to talk to our Riverside County reporter about that. And finally, the Quarry quandary. The Temecula Quarry is once again in the news. Lots of politics behind the scenes. We're going to be getting some analysis on what's happening there. So first, headlines, endorsements. Not all created equal. It depends on who you're getting an endorsement from. And interestingly enough, Joe Arpaio, who is a controversial figure, a sheriff in Arizona's Maricopa County, dubbed America's toughest sheriff, recently endorsed Michael Kennedy, who is running for a judge's seat in Riverside County. Michael Kennedy is seen in a photo right next to Joe Arpaio. And again, Joe Arpaio has been in the news. He's being investigated right now, I think, by the Department of Justice. And Michael Kennedy had this to say on his Facebook page, which is kind of interesting. Quote, "He does not agree with me on everything under the sun, nor I him." So there's that endorsement. Keep an eye out for other endorsements. Super PAC-man, Gary Miller has been quite popular with the National Association of Realtors Super PAC that has donated quite a bit to his campaign. But Gary Miller may be running for the 31st Congressional District. National Association of Realtors Super PAC, though, thinks he's running in the 42nd Congressional District and keeps saying as much on their filings. Insider Edition, State Senator Bob Dutton recently said he's a conservative Republican, but not a Washington politician. This was listed in one of his recent campaign flyers. Interestingly, though, because he wants to be one since he's running in the 31st congressional race against Gary Miller, who I just previously mentioned. So Washington insider, maybe not now, but he might be if he's elected. So we'll see. And then finally, Gigi wins. Gigi, who was Gigi Hanna, that is, who was running for San Bernardino City Clerk. A judge has recently said that she did indeed win with a very narrow margin. 6 votes in that election determined that she had won the race for City Clerk. Of course, even though the judge has said that she won, there are appeals outstanding because there are some folks, challengers, who are claiming that there are some votes that maybe didn't count. So the judge said she won, but we'll see. So there you go. Those are our headlines. We're going to talk with our Sacramento reporter very shortly about the California budget because always in the news, there are more cuts on the way because there is a growing deficit. So stay with us, and we're going to be talking to Jim Miller in Sacramento. And we're back to talk with Jim Miller in Sacramento, who's going to tell us a little bit about the California budget crisis because it's been in the news, and it's once again in the news because our deficit has apparently grown to about $15.7 billion. Yes, billion with a B. Larger deficit than expected, and Governor Jerry Brown came out to say that the $1.4 billion to come from former redevelopment agencies, that's going to be in addition to what he was taking before. Also healthcare welfare cuts, and then 4-day work weeks potentially for state employees. So Jim, you're on the line with us. Jim, tell us a little bit about what happened because this grew quite exponentially from the last time he came out to talk about the California budget.
Yeah, hi. That's right, Kim. And right, he put out his revised budget plan, which was a revision from what he proposed in January. And the main top line number was that the deficit has grown from, like you were saying, $9 billion to almost $16 billion. I mean, there are a variety of factors that have been cited for what caused the increase, but the main thing is that about $4 billion in expected revenue didn't show up, or the estimates have come in lower. Some cuts were blocked by the courts or otherwise didn't take effect, and also because the complicated law that governs school state obligations to schools makes it so the state actually owes more money to schools now.
So we have less revenue coming in, we have the state owing money. Apparently this new budget review, there are new cuts, but there's also apparently new revenue coming in, or at least new sources for revenue. So tell us a little bit about that. Where are the cuts coming from and where's the revenue coming from?
Right, and something I'll just point out, I mean, if you compare to last year, state revenue was up from 2011-12 to 2013-14. I mean, just kind of the way state finances are, that in some ways is not enough to cover all the state's spending obligations, so that forced the Brown administration to look for some other sources of revenue. And on Monday, they proposed taking another $1.4 billion from former redevelopment agencies. These would be assets held by the agencies, and in particular, there's a big chunk of money that had been slated for affordable housing projects, which had been part of redevelopment's mission before the agencies were disbanded. The other kind of interesting pot of revenue that the governor wants to tap into is the money the state will be receiving as its share of the recent settlement in the nationwide mortgage or foreclosure case. And the governor wants to use that revenue for existing state programs and debt service that have a connection to housing, but maybe don't have much of a connection to helping out homeowners who can't afford to pay their mortgages.
Well, and it's all very unwieldy. It's a huge economy. It's the state of California. I thought it was interesting in your story that the governor described it as, quote, a pretzel palace of incredible complexity. How would you describe it? Do you have a food metaphor that describes what's going on with the California budget right now?
Good question. I mean, that maybe depends on what side of the issue you're on, but in terms of maybe just the complexity and the variety of things going on and moving parts, maybe something like a bouillabaisse soup.
True. It sounds tasty. Good old California economy is a bouillabaisse soup. I like it. There's a lot going on. Jim, thanks so much for giving us an update on what's going on. Hopefully there isn't another increase in the state's deficit, and certainly we're going to keep an eye on your stories and find out where this money is going to be coming from and what's going to happen with all the cuts. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we're going to be moving on to talk about the 35th congressional race involving Joe Baca and quite a few other Democrats with our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Ben Goad. Ben, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. Tell us a little bit about what's going on right now, because this is a field that is filled with Democrats. So what's happening in this race, the 35th congressional seat?
Right, so the 35th is made up of Ontario, Pomona, Chino, parts of Fontana and Rialto. And in terms of voter registration, it's very Democratic and heavily Hispanic, so it's really no surprise that there aren't any Republicans running. There's three candidates. Two of them are Democrats. Joe Baca, who's currently a congressman, and State Senator Gloria Negrete-McLeod. And both of them have long records in elected office representing parts of San Bernardino County. And with California's new top two primary system, there's some expectation that they'll both move past next month's primary and on to the November general. There's also a third Green Party candidate that we have to also mention, Anthony Vieira, who is a financial analyst from Pomona, also running.
Now, is there anything clear separating all of the candidates right now? Because, yeah, they're all kind of in a similar party, and they're probably going to move on to the general election. At least two of them will.
Yeah, really, there definitely seems to be a lot of common ground. We asked all the candidates in area races to fill out questionnaires asking them where they stand on a number of issues. And for example, all three of these candidates mentioned transportation and easing traffic congestion as one of their top priorities. They also all favor local control over Ontario Airport, which, as you, Kim, have chronicled in a number of stories, has been hemorrhaging money and is now under the management of Los Angeles. So there's a lot they have in common.
Well, and in terms of what they say distinguishes themselves from each other, what are those differences?
Well, McGrady McLeod points to her record in the state legislature, where she says she earns a reputation of working across party lines. She also notes that she's the only one who has lived in the district for 42 years, and I think that's kind of a jab at Baca, who actually lives outside the district lines. Baca, meanwhile, has noted that he won the endorsements of both the National Party and the California Democratic Party, and he points to his experience and his seniority as a 7-term congressman. And Vieira makes kind of the opposite argument. He describes the other two as career politicians and says they've become out of touch with the constituents. And since he's neither Republican or Democrat, he said he'd be able to kind of get beyond party politics that are responsible for all the gridlock in Congress lately.
Well, and Ben, I'm glad you mentioned, too, that we, as the Press Enterprise, you had gotten quite a few questionnaires back from candidates. So did Jim. So did all of our reporters here. And all of those questionnaires are available on PE.com. So if folks want to see what the candidates said about certain issues and get a little bit more of a feel for who they are, you can go to PE.com and check out those questionnaires. And Ben, thanks so much for joining us today. And hopefully you'll keep us updated on other races next week for the next edition of Political Empire.
Will do.
Thanks. And we're going to be right back with our Riverside County reporter, Jeff Horseman, to talk to us about the supervisor races that are occurring, as well as the quandary that's going on with the Temecula Quarry still. There's so many elections and so little time, but we are going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the Riverside County supervisor races, namely District 1 and District 3. District 1 is made up of Riverside, Wildomar, Lake Elsinore, and Canyon Lake. District 3 is Southwest Riverside County, Hemet, and San Jacinto. And luckily today I have our Riverside County expert, Jeff Horseman, who's going to talk to us about both of these races. Jeff, tell me a little bit about who's running in District 1.
Well, District 1, you have the incumbent Bob Buster, who's had the seat since '93, taking on Assemblyman Kevin Jeffries and Mike Soubirous, who's a retired California Highway Patrol commander. And it's interesting because Subaru's wife, Linda, actually ran against Buster in 2003. So what you're looking at there, because it's a top 2 primary system, is a very good likelihood that the race is not going to be decided in June, and you're going to have 2 candidates doing a runoff in November.
Now, in particular in this race, the labor unions have taken quite an interest, correct?
Absolutely. They are heavily funding and supporting Mike Soubirous. They believe that Bob Buster kind of vilified them with pension reform, made them all look like they had fat cat pensions, when in fact they say it's him who has the very wealthy pension. And so they're putting their money and their political weight behind Soubirous. Now, that raises questions for Mike in terms of, can he convince voters he's going to be an independent voice? But absolutely, unions have a lot of interest, and Buster isn't backing down. He's almost priding himself in the fact that the unions are trying to take him on.
Now, how exactly are his challengers challenging Buster, though, in this race?
Well, they're trying to portray him as out of touch, that, again, getting back to the pension issue, say it could be as much as $140,000 annually, and just that they need, that there's new blood that's needed on the Board of Supervisors dais, and both Soubirous and Jeffries have talked about the need to cut county spending, to do pension reform, and to create an environment that is more business-friendly, ultimately.
Now, he's deflecting, obviously, those challenger statements, but what is he actually campaigning on? Buster, that is. What is he campaigning?
He's running on his experience. He's running, again, on the fact that he took on the unions, and now they're out to get him, and this just proves that he's taken on the taxpayers. He's talking about the things he's done for the county in terms of, the TUMP fee, which he says has raised $544 million for transportation projects, and of course his support for the UC Riverside Medical Center.
Now, talk to me about District 3. So who's running there?
District 3, you have Jeff Stone, who has held the seat since 2004, is running against a gentleman by the name of Joe Scarafone, who's a first-time candidate from Hemet. He's a retired Border Patrol officer. And, it's interesting because this is almost a David versus Goliath battle, because Stone has considerable advantage in terms of name recognition and fundraising. And so Scarafone, he really has work cut out for him if he wants to score the upset here.
Now, why is he running if it is that David and Goliath situation?
Well, he's running because he talks a lot about the struggle he had trying to get his RV lot business permitted. He said he had to spend as much as $80,000, and it took 3 years to get the 30-space RV lot on his property. And so he's really trying to tap into that. He's trying to talk about government getting out of control. Interestingly enough, he also spends quite a bit of time talking about this Agenda 21 issue, which a lot of people, they see this UN platform as infringing on private property rights, and he says that he'll fight that at the Board of Supervisors level, as well as take on what he calls banking corruption. And
what is Jeff Stone campaigning on?
Jeff is pretty much running on his record. He's saying that this will be his last term, at least in the Board of Supervisors. One thing, I think if he gets reelected, he's going to talk about wanting to further his one country community plan, which will kind of overhaul the zoning and kind of create more opportunities for wineries to go in that region. And also, he's been a strong advocate for cutting the size of county government in terms of, he doesn't think that the county is doing enough to lay off people. He said, we really need to right-size our governments given the decline in revenues.
Well, Jeff, thanks so much. That is a heck of a primer on both district races, so hopefully folks get a better idea as to who's running, what the issues are. We're going to go into another issue that was somewhat breaking yesterday that you were on top of, and you've been on top of for quite some time. So the Liberty Quarry in Temecula, it has been very controversial, quite a few meetings where hundreds have gathered on both sides of the issue. What's happening?
Well, I think everybody thought that Tuesday was going to be the formal final denial kind of routine for this project, but what ended up happening was the board, they affirmed their vote to deny the project, but then John Tavaglione, who voted to deny the project, sided with Supervisors Ashley and Benoit in certifying the project's environmental impact report. And why that has opponents up in arms is they're saying, hey, this allows the quarry developer Granite Construction to come back within maybe tomorrow and submit a new quarry plan, and because they have that, what they call the EIR certified, that means they're not going to have to go any further environmental review, and it's going to make it that much easier for them to get this quarry that they so despise passed.
Now, if I understand correctly, too, it's such a passionate issue for some that there's even been name calling, correct?
Yes, I've heard just since this morning, Supervisor Tavaglione referred to as a Judas or a Benedict Arnold or a traitor, because on the one hand, here he is voting against the quarry, but then in terms of the critics' view, he's leaving the door open for it to come back down the line. Now, John Tavaglione is running for Congress. He did face quite a bit of pressure from both sides, being the swing vote on this whole issue. So there's some speculation that maybe he was trying to satisfy both sides in this. He talked about how conflicted he was, but it's really turned out to be a no-win situation for him as he seeks higher office.
Well, Jeff, thanks so much. It's interesting, and I'm sure there's going to be even more news about what's going on with the Temecula Quarry. Apparently, it's not done yet. And thanks so much for telling us also about the Riverside County Supervisor's race. And thanks, everyone, for joining us for yet another edition of Political Empire, this jam-packed edition with lots of news. Be sure to keep an eye out for us, especially when it gets closer to the election. June 5th is the primary. And always check PE.com for all of the latest news on what's going on with the election and beyond.